Braum is slated to get nerfed again on the upcoming patch, and as a Braum player, I thought it was important to share my thoughts on the nerfs that are coming to Braum and whether I think they're justified or not, and the choice of nerfs and that sort of thing. And we can then lead into a broader discussion about the state of the game and balancing the game in general, and my opinion on how I think that the game should be balanced or how Riot can approach balancing the game, because I think the changes to Braum highlighted a lot of interesting decisions that Riot has to make when it comes to how they balance champions in the first place. So currently, to just get us on the same page and talk about Braum and his power level right now, Braum on this patch after the first nerf is still sitting at a 51.75% win rate. He's the 7th most picked support champion in Emerald Plus with an 8% pick rate and a 12% more or less ban rate. This puts him at the 9th most banned support champion, 7th most picked support champion, and win rate wise, he's the 10th, but of course this is going to include some low sample size champions as well, so that's whatever. So obviously Braum is still probably overperforming a little bit. If we pull up Braum here, the first nerf to Braum that they just did was to nerf his base armor from 47 to 42. And the nerf that they have slated in the patch preview here for next time from Freak is to nerf his armor again from 42 down to 35. I don't know why they listed 40 here instead of 42. So maybe this will change slightly if they realize that he's supposed to be at 42. Maybe this will be 37 instead of 35. But regardless, they're talking about taking him from 47 all the way down to 35, which is a pretty significant reduction in his armor. Obviously, it would be 12 flat armor, nearly 25% of his base armor just gone. And then they're also going to nerf his scaling armor, it looks like, a little bit from 5.2 armor per level to 5, which is going to matter a little bit as well because it's not a huge amount of armor. I mean, even by level 15, it would be three full armor. So it's not going to, reduce a whole lot of armor. And by that point in the game, Braum is probably making up for some of this by, getting armor from his items and things like that. So it's not, the scaling change isn't, that big of a deal. But it is quite a lot of armor to take away from the champion. And I think that the problem that I have with this is when we think about the best way to approach buffing or nerfing a champion, I think we can all agree that we should really be addressing what is causing the champion to be good in the first place. So the first place that we would look to try to determine why is Braum performing so well right now is to take a look at Braum's patch history and see what changes have been made to Braum in the past couple of years that might have led to Braum becoming strong all of a sudden recently. And the answer is that we need to look further because there's nothing in his patch history that significantly increased his power level much within the last year or anywhere near the time frame that Braum has suddenly become very good and much more prevalent in the meta. So we have the nerf here, the first nerf to his base armor from 47 to 42. They made it so that his W cast now has a forgiveness radius of 175 units. As far as I can tell, this means that, if a Braum player is trying to W to their teammate and their cursor is a little bit off of their teammate, it's going to have a bigger range of being able to detect that allied champion and dash to them. So this is kind of like a low elo quality of life change. Stats selection radius increased to 130 units from 100. Really, I don't even know what this means, but again, it's probably a small quality of life change that has very little to do with gameplay. It sounds like it's selecting, something. I honestly don't even know. Didn't even remember reading these two in the changes. In the patch notes. The last significant, change or buff to Braum came in 13.24, which was nearly 2 years ago. And that's when they increased his base mana regen by 1 from 6 to 7. And then they increased his minimum knockup duration on his ult to 0.6 seconds from 0.3. So this knock-up duration on his ult is quite a big deal, but of course Braum didn't suddenly become prevalent in the meta after this change 2 years ago, which suggests that this change to Braum, while significant, was totally fine given the circumstances, and only became significant, or maybe even now it's not, but became important, or his win rate became too much, much later on. So obviously, for the most part, Braum's been getting nothing but quality of life changes for the past 2 years or so. He had been getting a lot of buffs previously, if we keep going back before this, but the timeline obviously suggests that Braum went a year and a half, or more, without being overpowered. So it wasn't some change that they made to Braum specifically that made him much stronger. If we think about itemization and stuff like that, obviously Braum has some things in his runes and his items that have gotten stronger. For example, Knight's Vow. Let's see when the change to Knight's Vow happened. But Knight's Vow became much stronger. It got significant buffs. Let's see when that was. Well, actually, Knight's Vow's been nerfed recently. So Knight's Vow became much better in 1410. But again, this was about a year ago, a little over a year ago now. And then it had been nerfed actually since then. It had been hot fixed and lost 5 ability, haste, and 100 health. The cost was increased by 100. So I would say that given all of that, I don't think that Knight's Vow is the reason why, Braum is performing well, since that was also something that happened well over a year ago, and was even nerfed a little bit to compensate somewhat since then. So Knight's Vow is stronger than it used to be before that change, but again, that was well over a year ago, so I don't think that that's that big of a deal. Locket's the same as it's been, at least for the past couple of years. It's actually much weaker than it used to be when it was a mythic item, and before it was a mythic item, because they removed the Consecrate passive that gave your allies armor and magic resist completely from the item. So in that way, Locket's weaker than it used to be, but that was many years ago as well. And then as far as his runes have basically all stayed the same, with the exception of the last rune, with the introduction of the new Unflinching in League. So let's see if we can take a look at this. So obviously this was changed and buffed quite significantly. So this being changed and Braum being able to take this rune instead of Overgrowth was definitely a buff to the champion, but nothing significant. I mean, it's a minor rune that I don't really think would have significantly impacted the champion, and certainly this would have helped all tank support champions, not just Braum. So with that being said, what we can understand is that there haven't really been any direct changes to Braum, his runes, or his itemization that would really explain why over the last maybe couple of months, Braum has suddenly become much higher pick rate, much higher ban rate, much higher win rate. So the best that I can tell, as somebody who's obviously, quite a good Braum player, my opinion is that the AD carry meta is actually dictating why Braum is good right now. And the reason for that is because Braum's best champions to play with are champions that do extremely well with Braum's passive and hyperscaling and out team fighting the enemy team. Champions like Jinx, Sivir, Kai'Sa, these hyper carry AD carries that can auto attack very frequently to apply Braum's passive and do well in lane, but then also scale really, really well into team fights and the mid to late game, and then with a Braum protecting them are pretty much unstoppable during team fights. And in my opinion, it's the AD carry itemization, the yuntal into IE that almost every AD carry is building, that have really pushed champions like Jinx and Sivir to become, really good. And so my opinion is that the champions that are being played in AD carry are making Braum a much stronger champion. On top of that, the champions that are being played in support are champions that Braum is doing quite well into, and we'll get into that, notably like Lulu and and Thresh and Nautilus and things like that are being picked a lot right now. And Braum is also very good against these hyperscaling AD carries because of his E. So not only does he benefit from playing with them, but he benefits from playing against them because he gets way more value out of using his E against champions that are going to auto attack very frequently like that, really shutting them down for a few seconds during a fight at a crucial time. That can really benefit Braum. And so my opinion is that the AD carry itemization, the AD carry meta, is really the only thing that's significantly shifted and is problematic right now around Braum that's causing him to be so much stronger. And if we, assume that that's true, then really the best way to directly address what's making Braum powerful and hit the champion in a way that is solving the root cause of the issue so that you don't have to come back and rebuff or nerf the champion later on would be to address the AD carry itemization and the AD carry meta in general. And people are already asking for Riot to do that in general from the AD carry perspective, that the itemization is really stale, that it's not providing for enough champion diversity in the role, that, all kinds of things about it. The AD carry is too weak, that the items somehow are too strong compared to the other items at least, but the role is still too weak and things like that. And so as a result, Riot is obviously under a lot of pressure anyways to deal with the AD carry role right now. So I think that they should just deal with the AD carry role and then see what happens to Braum. Now, from Riot's perspective, dealing with an entire role is a very long process and a difficult way to fix a problem with a champion like Braum being very good right now. And it's too slow and indirect if they're going to wait a long time to deal with AD carry. So if they have to spend a long time, really researching all these AD carry items, designing changes for every single one, that are fair and aren't going to break the game, obviously that's a much more difficult task than just hitting Braum in a way that's going to slowly bring down his win rate a little bit. So I understand that, but the difficulty is that I've seen so many champions over the years, become strong due to extraneous circumstances not related to the champion, because an item gets too good or the champions that are being played in the meta is really good for them, and then they get tagged really, really hard, or their item gets removed from the game or nerfed extremely hard, and all of a sudden the champion becomes garbage for years because Riot hit both them and the item, or them and the meta changed, and then they forget to come back to the champion, and the champion sits at a 47, 48, 49% win rate for years before the champion becomes decent again. Before they finally realize a year later, hey, this champion's been really bad for a long time, let's give it some love. That's what I'm worried is going to happen to Braum. The first initial nerf of just taking 5 armor away, I felt like was a good change because his win rate was too high. They were going to need to address the AD carry itemization. It wasn't going to impact Braum all that bad because he has his W to make up for it. He overbuilds armor in his build anyways right now, which will make up for it. He has his E damage reduction to make up for it. So he's really not going to be in that bad shape, and it's not going to hit his win rate that much or do much to the champion to take 5 armor away from him. So my opinion was, if this is just a one-time nerf, this is a totally appropriate, fine way to hit Braum, considering how strong he is right now. Fine, we hit Braum for 5 armor, we change the AD carry items, and we see what's going to happen. Unfortunately, it's been a couple of patches now, and they're still not addressing the AD carry meta or itemization, and they're going to hit Braum again, this time even harder, for if we're going from 42 to 35 for another 7 armor plus, minus some armor on his scaling, 0.2 per level, which will be minus 3 armor at level 15. Or minus 2 armor at level 10. So they're going to hit him again with an even more significant armor change. And it's starting to get to a point where it's like, okay, are we going to slow down and address the root cause of the issue? Or are we just going to keep hitting Braum until he's like at a 50 or 51% win rate? And then they hit the AD carry itemization, the meta shifts, support champions change, and all of a sudden Braum's just F tier garbage. That's what I'm really worried about. So it kind of gets us into this conversation, broader conversation about how I think we should approach balancing the game in general, which is not only should we be targeting the actual root cause of the issue, But when you go to nerf or buff a champion, you have a lot of different ways that you could buff or nerf a champion. You could buff their items, you could buff their runes, but that's going to affect other champions that go those things. So those aren't going to be great unless you're trying to buff a whole class at once that all potentially go those things. And there are minor differences between what items and runes different champions in the class take. So even if you buff certain set of runes, you might accidentally then buff it for a couple other champions that are outside of that class that take it, or when you start changing the items and runes to help specific champions, a lot of times you're going to have all these unintended consequences that are going to affect the whole rest of the game. So you're going to tend to focus on then either the champion's abilities and passive or the champion's stats. And I get where Riot's coming from, which is Riot's basically saying, we'd rather address the champion's stats. And we see this in multiple changes this patch, whether it's Irelia's base HP per 5, or Braum's armor, Alistar's armor. They targeted Leona's armor as well. In a lot of cases, they're targeting these things. Why? Why are they targeting armor when it comes to tank supports? Well, Freak actually explained why, which is that he felt like targeting armor after they had done that to Leona was something that they had a metric on, so they knew how big of an effect that change was going to have potentially on Braum. Now, it didn't end up being the same amount that they thought it was going to be, but at least they have a better idea if they hit Braum's armor of what it's going to do to his win rate. Whereas if, let's say, they changed his ult duration to something it's never been before, or his ult knockup duration to something that it's never been before, or they reduce his E duration or something like that to something it's never been before, these changes that have never been done before and have no equivalent similar changes on other champions that they can look to, they're going to have no idea really. They're just going to be guessing at what the impact of those changes is going to be. So whereas they can hit the armor and say confidently, we don't think this is going to lower Braum's win rate below 51% or below 50%, they can't say the same if they were to make some sweeping change to his ult or his E. And so that's kind of one reason why Riot would opt to focus more and more in the future on nerfing stats, because they can be more sure that when they go to nerf a stat for a champion or for a specific stat for a specific class, that it's not going to overly affect the champion's ability to function. So for example, we see this all the time. They can pick a specific stat that they know is likely to have a big impact on the champion's win rate, and they can hit that. So for example, let's say that tank supports are overperforming. Well, they can hit armor on tank supports because they have a good idea of how much it's going to affect their win rate, and it's not going to take power away from the fun abilities that people enjoy playing about that champion. So there's this concept in balancing a power budget you may have heard before. And what power budget just means is that, let's say we think that a champion can sit at a 50% win rate. There's a lot of different ways we could have the same champion be powerful enough that they're winning 50% of their games. For example, on Braum, you could take power away from some things, like maybe you could take power away from his armor and his magic resist and his health. And as compensation for that, you could buff his E duration, or you could buff his ult knockup duration and make his ult and his E more impactful so that he's weak in lane and he's weak, most of the time. But when his E is up, he is really strong, and there's a debate there as to how, do you want this champion to have these moments where they're crazy, crazy strong, or do you want the champion to be more consistent throughout the game? You obviously want a mix of both. But the idea of power budget is that we have so much power that we can give to a champion. Where are we going to put it? And I think that when you look at what people enjoy about a champion, what people enjoy about playing a champion like Braum is undoubtedly using his E to save people, block a lot of damage, and have a big impact in fights. So you don't want to take away the impact of Braum's E, which people enjoy using and have fun with, in order to balance the champion, when you could just take away power from something else like his health or his base armor. So that's why they're going for the base armor. It'd be like if you took a champion that has a clear identity like a Rammus or something like that, and people really enjoy using his Q Powerball to like run at people for 10 seconds through the river and go really, really fast. If you took this speedy champion and took away a bunch of his movement speed and put it in something else, it just wouldn't, even if the champion's win rate was the same and it was a power neutral change, it just wouldn't feel as fun if they gave Rammus all of his armor back and all of his damage back, but his Q only lasted for 3 seconds, or 2 seconds or something like that. It just wouldn't be any fun. Imagine if Hecarim, what would Dantes do if all of a sudden Hecarim's Q did twice as much damage, but his E didn't give him any movement speed? It just wouldn't be the same. You might have a power neutral change or something like that, but it wouldn't be fun. Excuse me. So, obviously, you have this power budget that you can put into a champion. You don't want to take away the fun parts that people enjoy from the champion's kit, but you have to take it away from somewhere. You also don't want to hit abilities where you have no idea what you're going to do to the win rate. So you don't want to accidentally tank a champion to a 47% win rate because they were at 52, and now you're coming back with a buff, and now the champion's back at 52, and you're going back and forth, and you're lost on what you're doing with the champion, and you're causing a lot of chaos in the meta, and you're making players constantly relearn what's going on with the champion and what their limits are and stuff like that. None of that is good. So, as a general rule of thumb, this approach of finding what stat kind of statically makes sense to hit on different classes of champions is a smart idea. So, for example, saying to tank supports, we know that hitting your armor is going to make you more vulnerable in lane and in team fights because you'll die easier. And so you're going to have less win rate because you need to be more careful with what you're doing. So you're either going to go in and die more, or you're going to have to play safer and be able to make less plays. Fine. Maybe for enchanters, their identity is that they should have a weak lane, but then they scale up and their healing and shielding becomes very, very strong. So you could hit kind of two areas. If they're too strong later in the game, their scaling is just too oppressive and it's too impossible to beat them, and you don't like the way that that's going, then you can nerf the amount of healing and shielding that they're giving. Or you have a very specific set of items that are targeted at those class of champions that you could hit as well, like the healing and shielding power percentages on those enchanter items. Or you could say Lulu's doing way too well early on in lane, so we're going to hit her health, because by taking her health away, she's much more vulnerable to dying to all-ins versus tank supports, rather than just being able to poke them out of lane and winning lane and scaling well into the later stages of the game. So we're going to take some health away from her so that she can't trade as much, so that she's much more vulnerable early. So you have stats like that you can tag in different roles. Maybe for AD carry, it's base attack damage or it's attack damage per level, where you can very clearly hit that attack damage per level and make the champion weaker without taking any power away from their kit, but having a good idea of what it's going to do to their win rate. For mages in mid lane, it might be like, it's a little bit of a weirder one, but you might have like the AP ratio on the abilities is usually something that they hit. -5%, -10% AP ratio from their abilities, so that they scale a little bit worse with AP, so that they're not doing as well. Obviously some things like that you can hit. With junglers, obviously you can nerf their clear speed a little bit by targeting specific things. So you have these basic stats that you can hit without affecting how the champion feels to play or what makes the champion fun, but you're able to predict what's going to happen with the win rate. That's good. And I think that this change is targeting that type of a change at Braum, which I think is good and healthy for the game, in order for the change to be predictable, in order for it to not take power away from what people enjoy about playing the champion. However, what we are missing the mark on when it comes to Braum is understanding why Braum is good right now, which is because of the AD carry itemization and meta, and a failure to address that actual issue that's causing Braum to be good, and instead very heavily hitting his armor more than they've done to Leona or Alistar or any of these other champions. We're talking about taking away in total from 47 to 35. We're talking about taking away 12 armor, and then again by level 15 another 3 with the scaling. So we're talking about taking away 15 armor from Braum. That's a very significant amount of armor that we're taking away from the champion. And I'm not so sure, I wouldn't be so sure that taking away more and more armor from the champion is going to have the same effect at each point of armor that you take away. So for example, if you were to take Braum from 47 armor to 46, it really doesn't do anything and doesn't change the way that people would play around Braum at all. Whereas if you take Braum from 47 armor to 35, now people might realize that Braum is a lot more vulnerable to poke, and they might change their behavior around how they play around the fact that Braum has so much less armor. And so taking such a significant amount of armor away might have more of an impact on win rate than you would expect, because it's not about each point of armor that goes away takes away the same amount of win rate. It's more like behavior will change over time. People will realize how much squishier and more vulnerable to poke Braum is, and he will start losing lane gradually more and more and more. It's another reason why I think hitting him back to back without leaving a lot of time for these armor changes to materialize in win rate is something that's quite concerning. Even though this patch is wrapping up and coming to an end, so we're nearly 13 days out of 14, 12 or 13 days out of 14 into this patch, Braum's win rate just since yesterday has continued to drop from it was 51.81% in Emerald Plus down to today when we looked it was 51.75%. Now it's 0.06%, it's not a lot, but the fact that we already have such a big sample size of games, and with no additional changes from day 12 to 13 into the patch, we're still seeing Braum's win rate drop, suggests to me, at least, that this is a change that is going to take time for people to get used to as they get, as they lane more against Braum with the new changes. And so to significantly hit him again right after, I think that we're going to see a much larger drop in win rate from this set of armor nerfs than Riot expects, because of the fact that they're not all going to be equal, because it's going to change the way people behave. And we're not addressing the root cause. What's more concerning even than that is that when they do address the AD carry itemization and the AD carry meta shifts, Braum is going to significantly decline, maybe experience a 1 or 2% decrease in win rate when he's already between 50 and 51% after these nerfs come through in the next couple of days. And now Braum's going to fall to 49 or potentially even 48% after the meta shifts, but somewhere between 48 and 50% when they said that they wanted Braum to be at like a 51% win rate. And then I'm worried, of course, like I've said, that he's going to be left sitting at a very negative win rate like that for a long period of time, because, hey, he had his run while he was good and he's just being cycled out of the meta and we've forgotten about him. And, there haven't been direct changes made to him in a while. So, he just gets forgotten at a 49% win rate. We hope that doesn't happen. So that's the difficult situation that they're in there. But it brings up a kind of a larger question about balancing the game in general, which is how should you go about targeting champion nerfs and buffs? Is this a good way to do it by focusing on the stats instead of the abilities? Obviously, this isn't what's making Braum strong, and it's not even the strongest part of Braum's kit or the ability that makes Braum a good champion. But if it is moving his win rate a little bit in the direction that they want it to move, maybe it's an appropriate way to balance the champion without hitting what people enjoy about the champion. But of course, we're running into this issue where maybe they're going too far without realizing what the root cause of the problem is. That could be a concern. But in general, obviously we have to talk about like the AD carry items and what's going on with the AD carry. This is going to take them a while to figure out. I've always been advocating for, and you've heard me say it before, that Riot's approach to balancing roles in general in the game is a little bit weird. They seem to be under the impression that because in solo queue, everyone wants to climb and have this big impact on the game and stuff like that, that every role needs to have, the same impact on the outcome of the game. Kind of like it's like equity in League of Legends. Like every role needs to have the same impact on the outcome of the game. Otherwise, one role is more powerful than another and therefore more broken. And I think that this is a really flawed way to view the game. I've said it before, but in basically every team sport and in every good game, things don't have the same power level. Roles don't have the same power level. It makes the game more engaging and dynamic if there are roles that are the main character and that have more impact on the outcome of games. And some people really want to and enjoy playing those roles, like quarterback. And if you do not have a role in League like quarterback, which is currently jungle, unfortunately, if you do not have a role like that, then people will probably eventually, at least on some level, some people will leave and go play a game where they can be the quarterback, where they can 1v9, and where their role allows them to do that. What's weird, I think, about League is that the role that is the quarterback of League shifted dramatically over the years from AD carry to jungle. And that also changed the dynamic of support a lot, because support used to be about you're going to help this person on your team who has the most ability to carry team fights, the AD carry. Your job is to help protect them at all costs in order to get them to be the strongest they can be in order to carry those team fights and win you the game. And now that's completely shifted to abandon your AD carry. Your role is good as a support because you can move around the map a lot by leaving your AD carry, and you should be linking up with your jungler in order to facilitate plays around the map where you have a numbers advantage or your jungler can make things happen. This is just a really weird dynamic, I think, for League, where you've seen the role that is primarily designed to carry the game and have the most impact randomly shift. And I think for support players, it's a bit jarring as well, because obviously you want to be supporting the person who's going to carry the game and give you the best chance of winning the game. And if the optimal playstyle for support is to play for your jungler instead of playing for your AD carry, that feels like something is fundamentally inherently wrong with the game, because it's so different from how the game used to be played. Now, if that's the direction Riot wants to stick with the game, maybe it's just the evolution of people getting better at the game and realizing that the roles that are free to move have the most impact on the game. I've said it before when we think about getting better at League, but League is a numbers game. League is always about creating numbers advantages in fights, so that you're pretty much guaranteed to win the fight no matter how much you muck it up. And so the most impactful roles in the game are primarily, in my opinion, jungle. I would put support at number 2 and then mid lane at number 3. And the reason for this is because if you look at the roles, and then I would put, AD carry and top both suck, but I would put maybe AD carry number 4, maybe. Or maybe top number 4, but they're both pretty bad. I mean, there's a pretty steep drop off. But it's no surprise that when you go down that list in terms of how impactful I think the roles are in the game, it's literally just what roles can move the most to create numbers advantages. So it's number 1, your jungler is free to be able to, they're that free man who can go anywhere based on their pathing. They can choose to path to a certain area so that they can create a numbers advantage there in that area. So they get to dictate who's strong side, who's weak side. They dictate how you're playing your lane bot when they're top and how you're playing your lane bot when they're bot. Everything revolves around the jungler when you're understanding how to play the game, because you can't play aggressively at all. You shouldn't even trade if your jungler's on the wrong side of the map, or the opposite side of the map from you, I should say. And if your jungler is on your side of the map, all of a sudden the way that you play the game completely changes. You can be aggressive, you can trade, can do whatever you want. You can basically bully and harass your lane opponent and abuse your cooldowns in a way that's really kind of not fair as far as laning is concerned, really. And so, junglers get to be that, even just if they're doing their camps near enough to you that they can reach you if a fight were to break out. Your jungler being nearby completely dictates the entire way that the game is being played. Well, then you have opportunities if you're doing well enough in bot lane where you can shove out your wave or your AD carry dies or recalls, where now all of a sudden the support is free to roam. And now the support can do that, but maybe even to an extreme, because, well, they have less opportunities to do so. When they do get to do that, they're not constrained by having to move around based on where camps are or farm in between. They can just go wherever they want, basically. Within the time window that they have, and then return bot. And so supports have that second most mobility. And then mid laners, same thing. If they're able to get priority in their lane by shoving out their wave, Look at what Doublelift talked about when he, just finished getting Challenger on mid. He was of the opinion that mid lane is even more impactful than support. Mid lane shoves out and is able to roam bot or, link up with his jungler and invade and things like that. And they're able to do the same thing that you would do on support. And so all of a sudden, by being able to free yourself like that, and have the ability to roam to either side of the map from a central location, all of a sudden mid lane's able to have a lot of impact. Top laners and AD carries just really can't do that. They're too far away from everything in order to link up. Frankly, especially AD carry champions are way too weak early to do anything like that. They don't provide enough if they're there. They don't do that much damage, and they're not tanky enough to survive. They're just kind of a liability on an invade, honestly, if anything. So an AD carry is able to have impact on the game basically by enabling their support to roam, by getting prio in the lane, which actually makes, in a way, in a weird reversal, AD carry is about manipulating your wave so that you can support your support. So that you can support your support to go roam and make a play, hope that your support is good and carries you. That's what you do as a good AD carry player. But that's kind of weird, right? Because then it's more like if you were to rename the roles nowadays based on the way that the game is balanced, support is more like a roamer and AD carry is more like you support the roamer. You're like collecting gold when the roamer is not able to be in the lane to collect gold and XP. You're shoving out your waves so that they have windows in order to be able to roam. Really, you have a roamer or someone who links up and helps their jungler, supports their jungler, and then your AD carry is just a support for your support. That is a weird dynamic for sure. And yuntal and IE has helped with that and given AD carry some agency back because it is powerful. But it's powerful in a way that none of the other AD carry items are. And so it's made AD carry builds very static, where if your champion can't go yuntal IE, in a lot of cases your champion sucks. Not every case, but in a lot of cases your champion sucks. And the other items that you maybe should be able to go need to be buffed so that they're in line with yuntal and IE. And really what we're waiting for on bated breath here from Riot is Riot going to buff all the other AD carry items so that they're options instead of yuntal and IE, or is Riot just going to nerf yuntal IE? And if Riot nerfs yuntal IE, AD carry is going to go back to being even more useless, right? They're going to go back to being the support for the support. If they buff all the other AD carry items, then maybe you'll get an AD carry role that has a little bit more power and agency in the game, and has build diversity at the same time. And that would be the ideal, but we'll see what they do with that. So that's on role balance. And then there's obviously like what we kind of got into, I think we've covered pretty sufficiently with the way that they're going about doing the champion balance. I think it is healthy to target certain stats like this instead of hitting the champion's abilities. But you have to really lock in and determine what is causing the champion to be good. So like if you previously buffed the champion recently and that's what's causing the champion to be too good, then I would focus on nerfing the primary ability that they just buffed that's making the champion strong. But if you have a situation like Braum, where clearly it's circumstances around him and not the champion itself that suddenly becomes stronger, then you really need to, unless maybe it's a signal that Riot plans on keeping the circumstances related to yuntal and IE the same for a while, that could be an indicator of that. But unless you're planning on keeping the circumstances the same because you feel like they're too hard to change all of the things around him, just for one champion or whatever, then I guess. But I think they need to address the AD carry itemization stuff in general. So that's kind of my thoughts on, on this sort of balance with the game right now. I would also say as well, we should talk really quickly about like the mage matchups and stuff like that. So we can see right now, my opinion is that enchanters are really, really strong right now. It's just that people don't play them a ton, but actually you'll see, they're being played quite a bit. 4 out of 5 of the most played support champions in Emerald Plus are enchanters right now. Lulu, Nami, Karma, Milio, with the exception of Thresh. And they're all doing really, really well, right? Lulu's at 51.88%. Nami's at 52. Milio's at 52. Karma's at 50, but the thing about Karma that is important to note is that Karma really should be at 52, but she's got 2 build paths. So we can see that the easiest way to see it is in terms of items, you can go Dreammaker, Moonstone, Redemption, Dawncore, which is your Enchanter build, or you can go Zazax, which is a meme support item, Malignance, and Shiroya's, and then you end up not as good. You can max Q if you're going for that poke support build, or you can max E if you're going for the Moonstone Enchanter build. What we can see with the largest sample size really clearly is that if you max E on 32 or 33,000 games of sample size, you win 52.3% of your games on Karma, whereas if you max Q, you only win 50.3% of your games on 81,000. So even though it's a little bit less common, people just haven't adapted to the fact that you should be maxing E and building Karma full Enchanter. So obviously, if you do that, you're winning 52% as well. So my opinion is that 4 out of the top 5 champions are Enchanters with a 52% win rate, and Enchanters are really, really strong. And then we get into like the next Enchanters on the list, or we have like Yuumi, which we'll talk about, and then Soraka and Janna. Soraka and Janna are being picked less at about 5% each, but they're both also at 52% win rate. And then Yuumi is sitting at a 49% win rate. And the only reason why Yuumi is not as high is because they've been preemptively nerfing Yuumi multiple times, and Riot is really cautious about letting Yuumi become good, because Yuumi is fundamentally a broken champion, as we've talked about before, because Enchanters are supposed to be weak and vulnerable in lane to getting all in order to make up for the fact that they scale and become the strongest support champions in the game. And Yuumi doesn't have that vulnerability because she just gets to sit on top of somebody and be untargetable. Even worse, Yuumi used to be a champion that had to, at least in order to use her passive, you had to pop out of your AD carry and auto attack somebody in order to get your passive. Now you're able to get your passive heal by just hitting somebody with Q while you're still attached to somebody and untargetable. So you don't even need to jump out as Yuumi or ever put yourself in a vulnerable position in lane. You don't ever need to do that to utilize your full kit. As Riot said, Yuumi is kind of an onboarding champion that they hope to keep as this niche champion that very new players learn when they're first learning to play the game with their friends. But that is never like competitively viable or viable in solo queue, especially at high elo. And yet Yuumi has crept up all the way to 49% win rate and a much higher pick rate, and its ban rate is shooting up despite multiple nerfs to the champion on previous patches. So my opinion is that Enchanters are actually overperforming tank supports right now, yet what we see in the patch notes is we're nerfing Alistar, Braum, and Rel. And again, Braum's performing about as well as the Enchanters are, so fair enough. But Alistar is sitting at a 50.7% win rate. And, Rel, again, much less picked. Nobody's banning the champion, really. Again, I guess the win rate's a little bit above 50%, but not anything crazy here with Rel either. So, sitting at 51.5%. So I don't know that these are the champions I would be focused on nerfing in support right now. So I think that's another thing that's leading Braum players to be frustrated right now. I'm like seeing what people are saying in the Braum Discord. People are very surprised that Braum is being nerfed over these other champions. I'm not super surprised that Braum's being nerfed, but again, I think we should be addressing the root cause of the issue, which is the AD carry itemization and the champions surrounding him in the meta right now. And I think that a lot of these Enchanters are actually just strong compared to tank supports. You've got Nautilus sitting at 49% as per usual. Thresh is a little bit high for Thresh being such a high skill ceiling champion. But, even Thresh sitting at 51.3% is not that high. Pyke's at 50%. Rakan's at 50%, Leona's at 51%, and we're getting way down in pick rate. Blitzcrank's at 50%. I don't think that tank engaged supports are a problem right now, to be honest with you. And then when we look at Braum's matchups specifically, that's where I think we can kind of see what we're talking about when we talk about one of the other things about balancing champions is not just taking power away from their kit in general, but let's see here, strong against. So we can see support win rates down here. So we're looking at this line. You can also make changes to the champion that make Braum really good in certain matchups and really bad in other matchups. And one of the things that I worry about here is that Braum is really performing well versus champions we might expect him to, like Nautilus and Blitzcrank, kind of standard engaged champions. But what's a little bit strange is that Braum is performing well against Yuumi, Lux, Seraphine, Karma, Brand. These aren't champions we would really expect Braum to be winning a lot against. So something kind of weird is happening with these matchups here, that Braum is winning as much as he is versus them. Now, even versus Karma, Braum's winning 51% of his games. So that's a little bit strange. Again, we would probably expect him to do decently versus Thresh and Leona. He's doing pretty well against Nami, which we wouldn't expect, pretty well against Zyra, which we wouldn't expect. He's doing decently versus Alistar, which is fine. He's doing like bad versus Senna and Lulu, and particularly against Sona, Janna, and Soraka and Zillion, which we would expect. But, when I'm looking at these matchups here, I'm surprised that he's doing so well into these certain poke matchups. Even his bad matchups like into Senna, he's holding his own. He's holding even in. And so I really believe that, again, a lot of the support meta as well is dictating why Braum is good right now. When we go back here and look, the fact that Braum is... let's see, versus Lulu and Nami specifically, since those are the most played. So Nami, he's at 51%, and Lulu, he is at, I didn't even see Lulu on here. Oh, there it is. Slightly negative, but basically holding his own. So Braum just has very even matchups into like Lulu Nami right now, and then he's just very positive into like Thresh, Karma, Nautilus and stuff like that. So his matchups just are nice right now in the meta as well. And that's part of what's, again, driving Braum's win rate up. It's not only those 80 carry pairings and stuff like that and synergy, but also the support matchups that he's playing against are just favorable. I would be questioning why he's doing so well versus champions like Lulu and Nami, and not doing worse versus them. See if we can fix that, because Braum's obviously supposed to be good into Nautilus, Alistar, Rel, but he's supposed to be bad into Nami, Lulu, Karma, and yet we see some really weird trends where, like, for example, I think Braum actually does really bad into Rel, 49% for some reason, but then, versus like his worst matchups like Lulu, Senna, Nami, and Karma, he's actually like pretty even. Like he's slightly winning into Karma and Nami. He's slightly losing into Senna and Lulu, but these are not matchups that are supposed to be 50-50 for Braum. These are supposed to be like hard losing, you should ban Senna every game. Usually over the years, my go-tos have been to ban Karma or to ban Senna, and yet these are some of, he's actually winning versus Karma and, pretty neutral versus Senna. So it's kind of a strange phenomenon here that's what's going on. So I would say, like, in general, really important to question whether the armor changes are going to help or hurt with certain matchups like this. And again, I would say that maybe, the armor changes are going to hurt Braum versus the 80 carry champions that are meta right now, because again, we have a lot of those, DPS heavy attack speed, like it auto attack reliant crit 80 carries right now. So that will hurt versus them, but it's not actually going to specifically target Braum in the matchups we would expect him to be losing more, which is, if you thought about maybe the way that Braum should be winning or losing as a champion, maybe it's his magic resist that needs to be hit, versus champions like Yuumi and Lux and Brand and Seraphine and Karma, that he really shouldn't be doing potentially as well as he is doing versus. On the other hand, as a Braum player myself, personally, I'd rather have his matchups versus everybody be even. So I'd rather see him do worse versus Blitzcrank and Nautilus and better versus some of the champions he's doing really bad versus right now, like Sona, Janna, and Soraka, because then it comes down to skill. So I'd rather, everything be kind of a skill matchup. But that's obviously just a personal preference that the matchups be more even. So you can think about if you're hitting his armor. Luckily, that is a pretty generic change because in bot lane, obviously, if you're hitting his base armor, you're just going to make him take more poke in pretty much every lane versus their AD. And not hurt him, I guess, in double mage bot matchups. But you might wonder if there was a change that you could have gone for that would like maybe help even out some of these matchups in a way that you would expect. But it's hard to say. So, that's obviously the direction they're taking Braum and that they've taken with the role balancing in general in the game. I hope that they deal with AD carry itemization soon, while they're still keeping Braum in mind so that they don't end up leaving him behind as the AD carry meta shifts. But we'll see. With that being said, good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.